The western coast of France, 1314. The feast had been forgotten, but not by Hugh Caldwell. The old ledger pages crumbled beneath his fingers as he traced their faded ink in the dim candlelight of the abbey library. 20 years a Templar archivist, and still discoveries awaited him in these ancient records. This particular entry, a banquet ordered by the Grand Master himself at the coastal stronghold of La Rochelle, was scheduled for October 13th, the very day King Philip's men had descended upon the order. No one had eaten that feast. The knights had been arrested in their sleep, dragged to dungeons across France on fabricated charges of heresy. Hugh closed his eyes, remembering. He had been 16 then, a novice scribe who had overslept that morning, awakening to find the Templar fortress in chaos. While his brothers had been hauled away in chains, he had escaped through a secret passage with nothing but the clothes on his back and a vow that would define the rest of his life, to preserve the truth of the order's innocence. Now, at 37, he lived as Brother Thomas in this remote Benedictine abbey, keeper of archives and secrets. The monks knew nothing of his past. They saw only a devoted scholar who had taken vows late in life, a quiet man who preferred parchment to people. Hugh believed with unshakable certainty that duty must always eclipse personal desire. Every sacrifice, his name, his past, the possibility of love or family, was justified by his mission to record the true history of his fallen brothers. This singular purpose had sustained him through 2 decades of solitude. A soft knock at the library door startled him. He hastily covered the Templar records with blank parchment. "Enter," he called, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The door creaked open to reveal Cecilia Coventry, the abbey's new herbalist and physician. Hugh had avoided her since her arrival 3 months prior, uncomfortable with how her presence disrupted the careful routine of his days. "Forgive the intrusion, Brother Thomas," she said, stepping into the pool of candlelight. Her face was partially hidden by her healer's hood, but he could see the intelligence in her eyes. "Father Abbot mentioned you might have access to older medical texts, specifically those detailing treatments for winter fevers." Hugh nodded stiffly. "The medical treatises are kept in the eastern alcove." He gestured vaguely, hoping she would take what she needed and leave him to his secret work. Instead, she moved closer, her gaze falling to the corner of the ledger he had failed to completely conceal. The familiar red cross of the Templar Order was just visible beneath the blank parchment. "You study the Templars?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Hugh felt his chest tighten with alarm. "Merely historical research," he replied. The Order's financial systems were quite sophisticated for their time. Cecilia said nothing for a moment, then reached into the folds of her robe to withdraw a small object. She placed it on the table between them, a seal ring bearing the distinctive Templar cross. "My father was a sergeant in the Order," she said simply. "He escaped the purge and lived in hiding until his death last year." Hugh stared at the ring, then at Cecilia's face, newly revealed as she pushed back her hood. The world he had carefully constructed over 20 years shifted beneath him like sand. "The medical texts can wait until morning," she said quietly. "But perhaps we might speak further of this shared interest." Thus began a dangerous connection. Through the bitter winter months, Hugh and Cecilia met in the library after Vespers, ostensibly to collaborate on a medical manuscript. In reality, they shared fragments of their hidden histories, her father's stories of Templar missions to the Holy Land, Hugh's first-hand knowledge of the Order's inner workings. Each confidence exchanged was a small act of trust neither had risked in years. "Why preserve these records?" Cecilia asked one night in late January as snow fell silently beyond the leaded windows. "The Order is destroyed. Those who survived have scattered or joined other brotherhoods." Hugh's fingers traced the edge of a worn account book. "Because the truth matters. Because what was destroyed was not corrupt, whatever King Philip claimed. The Templars served with honor. And is that enough to sustain you? This duty to a dead order? Her question unsettled him. For the first time in years, Hugh allowed himself to wonder if his life of secrecy and sacrifice was truly fulfilling his vow, or if he had merely been hiding from the world, from connection, from possibilities. "What else would I do?" he asked finally. "Live," she answered simply. February brought a visitor to the abbey, Bishop Henri of Orleans, a known supporter of King Philip's persecution of the Templars. His unexpected arrival sent Hugh into a state of quiet panic. If his collection of Templar documents were discovered, if his true identity were revealed, he would face imprisonment or worse. His requesting access to the library archives, Cecilia whispered to him after morning prayers. "The abbot has granted his request." That night, as the abbey slept, Hugh and Cecilia worked frantically by candlelight, concealing the most incriminating documents behind loose stones in the library wall. As they worked, their hands occasionally brushed, sending an unexpected warmth through Hugh's chest despite their perilous situation. "Why are you helping me?" he asked suddenly. "You risk much." Cecilia paused, a bundle of parchments in her arms. "My father lived in fear for 20 years. He died still looking over his shoulder, still haunted. I saw what happens when a life is consumed by secrecy and survival alone. And you pity me for the same fate?" A strange hurt colored his words. "No," she said firmly. "I admire your loyalty. But I've come to care too much for you to watch you disappear into these shadows." Her admission hung between them, impossible and inevitable all at once. Hugh felt something crack within him, the rigid certainty that had guided his every decision for 20 years. The bishop's visit stretched from days into weeks. He seemed particularly interested in records from the years immediately preceding the Templar arrests, requesting document after document from the abbey's collection. Hugh provided carefully curated selections, always conscious of the concealed Templar archives just feet away from the bishop's probing eyes. One evening in early March, the abbey bells rang in alarm. A fire had broken out in the east wing, near the infirmary. As monks rushed to form a bucket line, Hugh noticed Bishop Henri slip away from the commotion toward the deserted library. Hugh followed at a distance, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the partially open door, he watched the bishop move with purpose to the very wall where the Templar documents were hidden. This was no coincidence, the fire was a diversion, and the bishop knew exactly what he was looking for. Before Hugh could intervene, a voice rang out from the shadows. "My Lord Bishop, what an unusual hour for scholarly pursuits." Cecilia stepped into the room, a basket of herbs in her arms. "I was gathering supplies from my stores here when the alarm sounded." "How fortunate you weren't caught in the confusion." The bishop straightened, his expression hardening. "The good brothers have allowed me use of the library at my discretion." "Of course," Cecilia smiled pleasantly. "Though I wonder if Father Abbot knows you've taken an interest in this particular wall." "It's quite unremarkable, I assure you. I've examined every inch while gathering herbs that grow in the crevices." Hugh watched from the doorway, simultaneously terrified and awed by her cool composure. "You seem unusually interested in the library for a woman of your station," the bishop remarked coldly. "Knowledge heals as surely as herbs, my lord. But forgive me, you must be eager to rejoin the efforts against the fire. I believe it's nearly contained." The bishop hesitated, then swept past her toward the door. Hugh barely had time to conceal himself in an alcove as the man passed. When they were alone, Cecilia's controlled facade crumbled. "He knows," she whispered. "Someone must have informed him." That night, Hugh made a decision that shattered his decades of caution. The Templar documents, all of them, must be removed from the abbey immediately. But he could not accomplish this alone. "There is a place," he told Cecilia as they huddled in the herb garden under a cold, clear sky. "A forgotten stronghold on the coast, not far from here. Few know of its existence. The Templars used it as a waypoint for ships traveling to England." "You wish to move the archives there?" "But how?" "Not just the archives," Hugh said quietly. "Me. My life here is finished. The bishop will not rest until he discovers who I am and what I protect." Cecilia's face grew still in the moonlight. "Then I will help you escape, and pray for your safety." "I'm asking you to come with me," Hugh said, the words rushing out before he could reconsider. "I have spent 20 years living half a life, believing that duty required the sacrifice of all personal happiness. I cannot ask you to make the same choice, but I also cannot bear to disappear from your life without offering you the truth of what you've come to mean to me." Cecilia took his hands in hers. "You speak as if these are separate paths, your duty to the Templars and a life with me. What if they are one and the same? What if preserving the truth requires not just documents, but living witnesses who can tell the stories, who can rebuild something from the ashes?" 3 nights later, a cart left the abbey under cover of darkness. Hidden beneath sacks of dried herbs and medical supplies were the precious Templar archives. Hugh drove while Cecilia sat beside him, both dressed as common travelers. They had told the abbot they were making a journey to a neighboring monastery to treat an outbreak of fever. The coastal journey took for days. As they traveled, Hugh felt himself changing, not abandoning his duty, but expanding it, allowing it to encompass more than mere survival and secrecy. Each mile took them further from his self-imposed isolation. The forgotten Templar stronghold stood on a rocky promontory overlooking the churning Atlantic. From the outside, it appeared to be nothing more than a derelict stone watchtower, long abandoned. But Hugh knew its secrets, the underground chambers, the hidden dock, the multiple escape routes that had saved many Templar lives when the order fell. As they unloaded their precious cargo, Cecilia paused at the stronghold's threshold. "It feels as though we're stepping back in time," she murmured. Hugh nodded, memories flooding him. This place was to hold a great banquet, the day the Templars fell. The Grand Master had ordered a feast to honor visiting brethren from England. The preparations were complete, the tables set, the kitchens ready. But no one ever came. No one broke bread here. "Until now," Cecilia said softly. Together they explored the stronghold. Dust covered everything, but the structure remained sound, protected from the elements by clever Templar engineering. In the great hall, long trestle tables still stood in perfect rows, setting places untouched for 7 years, awaiting guests who were arrested before they could arrive. That evening, as the sun set over the ocean, Hugh made a fire in the ancient kitchen hearth while Cecilia prepared a simple meal from their provisions. They carried it to the great hall and sat at the head of the longest table, the first to dine there since that fateful October day. "To the forgotten banquet," Cecilia said, raising her cup. "And to remembering." Hugh raised his own cup, but found himself unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. 20 years of solitude, of rigid adherence to his vow, and now this, a shared meal, a shared purpose, a shared future. "I once believed that honoring the Templars meant sacrificing my own chance at happiness," he said finally. "I was wrong. The order stood for justice, for protection of the innocent, for building something greater than any single knight. That is what I will preserve, not just in documents, but in how I live." Cecilia corrected gently. "How we live." In the weeks that followed, they made the stronghold habitable once more. Hugh organized the archives in a dry underground chamber, carefully cataloguing each document. Cecilia established an herb garden and began brewing medicines to trade in the nearby fishing village, where they became known simply as a scholar and his wife who valued privacy. Word reached them occasionally of the outside world, more Templars executed, the order officially dissolved by papal decree. Yet in their coastal refuge, something new was taking root. Other survivors found them, first a weathered Templar sergeant and his family from Normandy, then 2 elderly knights who had been living as farmers in Brittany. By midsummer, their community had grown to nearly 20 souls. Each evening they gathered in the great hall, no longer dusty but filled with lamplight and conversation. They shared meals at the tables that had stood empty for so long, transforming the forgotten banquet hall into a place of new beginnings. On the anniversary of the arrests, Hugh stood at the Stronghold's highest point, watching the sun set into the Atlantic. Cecilia joined him, slipping her hand into his. 7 years ago today, everything I believed in was destroyed, he said. I thought preserving the memory of the Templars meant living in the past, guarding secrets until I died. And now, she asked. Hugh turned to her, taking in the face that had become as essential to him as breath. Now I understand that the truest way to honor them is to build something new from what remains. Not just archives, but community. Not just memory, but love. The bishop never found what he was looking for at the abbey, Cecilia said. But we found something neither of us expected. A different kind of treasure, Hugh agreed. He looked out over their growing settlement, the gardens taking shape, the repaired walls, the smoke rising from chimneys. Not a fortress anymore, but a home. That night in the great hall, Hugh rose to address those gathered around the tables. Children sat among the adults now, the first generation who would grow up hearing the true stories of the Templars, not the lies spread by their persecutors. 7 years ago, a banquet was planned for this hall, he began. It was to be a celebration of brotherhood and faith. That meal was forgotten when darkness fell upon our order. But here we sit today, breaking bread together in this same room. He looked around at these people who had become family, survivors, spouses, children, all drawn together by shared loss and newfound purpose. The Templars were more than knights and wealth, he continued. They were an ideal that people from different walks of life could unite in common purpose. That ideal lives on in this room tonight. Hugh raised his cup, his gaze finding Cecilia's across the table. In her eyes he saw reflected the journey that had brought them here, from duty-bound isolation to a love that had transformed his understanding of purpose. To the banquet, he said, his voice strong and clear. No longer forgotten, but fulfilled. The cups rose around the table, voices joining in response to the banquet. And in that moment, Hugh Caldwell understood that his true vow had never been merely to preserve documents or guard secrets. It had been to ensure that the spirit of the Templars, their courage, their conviction, their capacity for creating brotherhood amid chaos, would survive. Not in hiding, but in living fully. Not alone, but together. The forgotten banquet of the Templar stronghold had finally, 7 years late, found its guests.